Melissa Carter was walking down the aisle at her fourth wedding when Daniel Carter, the husband she claimed was dead for over a decade, stepped out of the crowd and brought her entire world crashing down. In the quiet town of Bellwood, Michigan, everyone knew Daniel Carter as a reserved, hard-working man. He lived a modest life, working 6 days a week at the local hardware store and spending his Sundays fishing at a nearby lake. He was the kind of person who never raised his voice, never missed a day of work, and never got involved in gossip. He had been married to Melissa Carter for nearly a decade. Their relationship seemed uneventful to the outside world, just another average couple going through the motions of suburban life. But appearances in Bellwood often hid deeper secrets. On April 12, 2012, Daniel didn't show up for work. At first, his boss assumed he was sick, an unusual event, but not unheard of. By the end of the day, after no call, no message, and no sign of him, concern began to grow. His phone went straight to voicemail. The police were contacted, and a welfare check was conducted at his home. Melissa answered the door. She appeared calm but tired, and she told officers they had argued the night before. According to her, Daniel had packed a bag and left after saying he needed space. She claimed he hadn't come back. Within 48 hours, Daniel's car was found abandoned at the edge of Pine Ridge National Forest, about 40 miles from his home. It was parked neatly off the road. The keys were in the ignition, and the doors were unlocked. His wallet, phone, and a small duffel bag were missing. No footprints or tire tracks were found nearby due to the recent rain. It looked like he had just vanished into the woods. Search teams were dispatched. Volunteers combed the forest for days. Helicopters flew overhead, and divers even checked a nearby lake. Nothing was found. Melissa appeared distraught in public. She gave one short interview to a local news station where she pleaded for her husband to come home. She mentioned that he had been under stress and had talked about just disappearing. Police found no history of mental illness or suicidal thoughts in Daniel's background, but without any physical evidence to contradict her, they couldn't make an arrest or accuse her of wrongdoing. The investigation slowed. Tips dried up. Months passed with no progress. Privately, however, some investigators weren't convinced by Melissa's version of events. Her behavior raised quiet concerns. She didn't join the search efforts. She moved out of their house within 3 weeks, and she seemed unusually composed during questioning. But again, there was no proof, just suspicions. She claimed she was devastated, but her actions painted a different picture. 6 months after Daniel's disappearance, Melissa filed for a death in absentia declaration. It was granted a year later. She collected a sizable life insurance payout and quietly left Bellwood. The town eventually moved on, and the case faded into the background. It became one of those local mysteries people whispered about at coffee shops. What really happened to Daniel Carter? No one knew. Or at least, that's what they believed. After leaving Bellwood behind, Melissa Carter disappeared from public view for nearly a year. She changed her name, dyed her hair, and moved to a mid-sized city in Ohio where no one knew who she was. Using the life insurance money she had collected after Daniel's presumed death, she purchased a condo and began presenting herself as a widow starting over. Her story was vague. She told new acquaintances that her husband had died in a tragic accident and that she was looking to rebuild her life. With no criminal charges ever filed against her and no one from Bellwood tracking her movements, she was free to begin again. In 2014, Melissa married a man named Greg Wallace. He was a divorced accountant with 2 teenage children and little interest in her past. To him, Melissa seemed kind, driven, and emotionally mature. Exactly the kind of woman he wanted as a partner. But within 2 years, that marriage unraveled. Friends later described Melissa as distant and secretive. She rarely talked about her feelings, and often shut down when Greg asked personal questions. The divorce was finalized quietly, with Melissa walking away with a settlement and another fresh start. By 2017, Melissa had relocated once again, this time to North Carolina. There, she got involved with a man named Eric Donnelly, a real estate investor. Unlike her first post-Daniel relationship, this one was more intense and fast-moving. Within months, they were living together. Within a year, they were married. But the pattern repeated itself. Melissa appeared loving and dedicated in public, but behind closed doors there were signs of control and manipulation. Eric's family never trusted her. His sister later told reporters that Melissa always seemed like she was playing a role, as if she was auditioning to be the perfect wife. The second divorce came faster. By late 2018, Eric had filed for separation, citing emotional abuse and deception. Melissa didn't contest it. She disappeared again, relocating this time to Georgia. Her trail was hard to follow. She used aliases, changed addresses frequently, and didn't leave much of a digital footprint. But she wasn't done chasing a bow. New identity. In 2021, Melissa reinvented herself once more, this time as Melissa Hartley, a motivational speaker and wellness coach. She created an online presence, complete with videos, blog posts, and self-help content about healing from grief and betrayal. Her words resonated with people who didn't know her past. She gained a modest following, made public appearances, and began hosting small workshops. Her narrative was compelling. A woman who had lost everything and rebuilt her life 4 times. By 2023, Melissa was engaged again, this time to a man named Jordan Mills, a successful tech consultant in Atlanta. This relationship seemed different. On the surface, more grounded, more stable. Jordan came from a wealthy family and was planning a large, lavish wedding at a vineyard outside the city. Melissa seemed happy, even radiant. No one suspected a thing. Most people around her believed she had finally found peace. But they didn't know her history, and they certainly didn't know what was coming. Melissa was just days away from her 4th wedding, and everything was about to fall apart. The day of Melissa Hartley's 4th wedding was picture perfect. The sun shone brightly over the rolling hills of the Georgia vineyard, where the ceremony was set to take place. Rows of white chairs were lined neatly along the aisle, adorned with fresh orchids and silk ribbons. Guests arrived in elegant attire, sipping champagne and posing for photos in front of the flower-draped archway, where Melissa and Jordan Mills would soon exchange vows. From the outside, it looked like a fairy tale. Melissa, dressed in an intricate lace gown with a long train, greeted guests with her usual poise and charm. To everyone around her, she appeared completely in control, graceful, confident, and ready for a new beginning. As the ceremony began, the atmosphere turned reverent. The music played softly, and Jordan stood at the altar, waiting. Then came the moment everyone was anticipating, the bride's entrance. Melissa walked down the aisle slowly, holding a bouquet of white roses. Guests stood to watch, smiling and snapping photos. There was no indication that anything was wrong, until, just seconds before she reached the altar, murmurs began spreading through the crowd. A man was walking down the center aisle. He wasn't dressed like a guest. His clothes were worn and mismatched, his face pale and weathered. He walked with a limp, and his expression was unreadable. Some thought he was homeless. Others assumed he was crashing the wedding. But those who saw his face closely noticed something chilling. He looked eerily familiar. When he reached the front of the ceremony, he stopped just a few feet from Melissa. For a moment, there was silence. Then, people began to gasp. One woman screamed. Melissa froze in place, her eyes locked on the man standing before her. Her hands trembled, and her bouquet slipped from her fingers and fell to the ground. The man, calm and deliberate, looked directly at her and said his name. He was Daniel Carter. The man everyone had believed to be dead for over a decade was standing at the center of his wife's fourth wedding. The ceremony dissolved into chaos. Guests rushed to the sides, some filming on their phones, others backing away in disbelief. Jordan, stunned and confused, turned to Melissa, who stood speechless, her skin pale and eyes wide. The officiant stepped back. No one knew what to say or do. Security was called, and police arrived within minutes. Daniel didn't resist. He showed identification, provided fingerprints, and calmly told officers that he had once been presumed dead by this very woman. Melissa was taken aside, questioned on the spot. Her calm facade began to crack. News of the incident spread quickly, first among guests, then across social media. Videos from the wedding surfaced online within hours, showing the surreal moment Daniel arrived and the bride's stunned reaction. For most people, it looked like something out of a movie. But for Melissa, the carefully constructed life she had built was beginning to unravel. The truth she had buried 11 years ago was no longer hidden, and the man she thought was gone forever had just come back to destroy it all. After the vineyard wedding descended into chaos, Daniel Carter was taken to a nearby police station for questioning. Officers were skeptical at first. A man presumed dead for over a decade had walked into a wedding and claimed he was the groom's long-lost predecessor. But Daniel had proof. His fingerprints matched records from Bellwood. He could recount details about the town, his former job, and even small things only the real Daniel would know. More importantly, the local authorities contacted Michigan investigators, and within hours his identity was confirmed beyond doubt. Daniel explained that back in April 2012, he had not simply walked away after an argument. He had been drugged. He remembered drinking something Melissa had given him shortly after dinner. The next thing he recalled was waking up in the dark, cold and barely able to move. His head was pounding, and he was lying in what felt like a shallow pit. He didn't know how long he had been unconscious, but it was long enough that the soil around him had begun to settle. His skull had been fractured, and he had difficulty speaking and seeing clearly. Somehow, he had clawed his way out of the shallow grave, disoriented and weak. Daniel stumbled for hours through thick forest until he reached a dirt road. There, he was found by a group of migrant workers in a passing van. The men didn't speak English, and Daniel was unable to communicate effectively due to his injuries. He was dropped off at a small, understaffed hospital over the state border. With no ID, severe memory loss, and no missing persons alert in the system outside Michigan, he was listed as a John Doe. Eventually, he was transferred to a psychiatric facility in Oregon under the name Michael Doe, where he remained for years. In that time, Daniel slowly regained fragments of memory, images, names, flashes of places. But nothing stayed long enough for him to piece together who he truly was. It wasn't until a documentary on cold cases aired at the facility in late 2022 that he saw a segment about Melissa Hartley, a motivational speaker once known as Melissa Carter. The sight of her triggered a flood of memories. Over the next several months, Daniel worked with doctors and local police to piece together his identity. Once confirmed, He made the decision to confront Melissa face to face, not just to stop her from deceiving another man, but to force her to see what she had tried to bury. The fallout was immediate. Melissa was arrested the same day as the interrupted wedding and charged with attempted murder, insurance fraud, and obstruction of justice. When investigators reopened the original case, they found far more than they expected. Melissa had researched lethal doses of various medications, methods of body disposal, and even online guides about staging suicides. Digital traces were found in old backups and cloud storage accounts she had forgotten to delete. Most damning of all was a deleted video file recovered from an old device. Melissa speaking directly to the camera, rehearsing what she would say if questioned about Daniel's disappearance. The truth was no longer hidden in the shadows. The woman once seen as a grieving widow was now the centerpiece of a calculated crime. And the man she tried to erase had returned, not as a memory, but as living, undeniable evidence. The trial of Melissa Carter, now infamous across the country, began in early 2024. Courtrooms were packed, and media crews lined the streets outside. The story was too wild to ignore. A woman accused of attempting to murder her husband, successfully convincing the world he was dead, and then being confronted by him 11 years later during her fourth wedding. The prosecution built its case around a clear narrative of greed, deception, and premeditated violence. They didn't need to exaggerate. The facts alone were chilling. Daniel Carter testified in front of the court, recounting in steady detail the events leading up to his disappearance. He described how Melissa had insisted on making him tea the night of their argument, how everything had gone black, and how he'd awoken buried alive in the forest. The jury listened in stunned silence as he told of his struggle to survive, the years spent in anonymity, and the long road to remembering who he was. For many, his story sounded like fiction, but forensic experts confirmed his injuries matched his account, and hospital records documented his years under the name Michael Doe. Investigators provided additional evidence. Google searches made from Melissa's devices about toxic substances, how long it takes a human body to decompose, and steps for filing death in absentia declarations. Her internet history, once thought deleted, was recovered from an old laptop found in a storage unit. The most incriminating piece was the recovered video where Melissa spoke to the camera in a detached, eerie tone, rehearsing a statement about Daniel's supposed depression and disappearance. Her voice was calm, but her words were carefully chosen, like someone scripting a lie to perfection. The defense claimed Melissa believed Daniel was truly dead and had moved on in good faith, but the evidence undermined that argument at every turn. They offered no explanation for the poison tea, the shallow grave, or the insurance documents filed just weeks after Daniel vanished. The jury didn't take long to decide. After only a few hours of deliberation, they returned a unanimous guilty verdict on all charges. Melissa was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She showed no emotion when the sentence was read, just a cold, distant stare, like the mask she had worn for over a decade had finally cracked, but there was nothing left behind it. Daniel left the courtroom a free man, but not an unbroken one. His life had been stolen from him, his identity erased, his trust shattered. He declined most interview requests, refusing to capitalize on his story. Instead, he moved to a small coastal town under a new name, quietly living out the years he almost lost. The scars, both visible and hidden, remained. Melissa's story became a cautionary tale, the subject of podcasts, documentaries, and books. But for those who followed the case closely, the most haunting part wasn't just what she had done. It was how close she came to getting away with it. Until the dead man walked back into her life and made sure the truth could no longer be buried.